Purim is one of the most fun and festive celebrations on the Jewish calendar. The Hebrew word Purim, which means lots, refers to the lots thrown by Haman to decide when the plot to murder the Jews would take place. During the holiday, children dress up in costume, synagogues produce plays reenacting the Book of Esther, and gifts are often exchanged. The scroll of Esther, referred to as the Megillah, is read, and of course, food is involved, with everyone enjoying special cookies called hamantaschen, described either as Haman's ears or hat. These unique cookies have an unusual shape and are often filled with poppy seeds or fruit. The story speaks of God's miraculous preservation of the Jewish people, even though this is the only book of the Bible where God is never mentioned by name. In the story, King Ahasuerus of Persia had ordered the execution of his queen Vashti. Soon after, the king arranged a nationwide search for a new queen. Out of the many young women brought before him, Ahasuerus crowned Esther as the new queen of Persia. Esther, whose real name was Hadassah, was a young Jewish woman, the cousin of Mordecai, the Torah sage. One day, the king's advisor, Haman, convinced the king to execute all the Jewish people in the kingdom. Hearing of Haman's wicked plan, Mordecai asked Esther to intercede before the king. Initially, Esther was afraid because the penalty for appearing before the king without an invitation was death. But Mordecai reminded her of God's sovereign plan for her life and for Israel's protection when he said, "And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." Esther chapter 4, verse 14. Esther agreed to go before the king and called for her people to fast for 3 full days. In her famous words, "And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." Esther chapter 4:16. Queen Esther invited King Ahasuerus to a banquet, and there she told him of Haman's wish to exterminate her people. Enraged, the king had Haman hanged on the gallows he had built himself, that was originally intended for Mordecai. Thereafter, a royal edict was issued authorizing the Jewish people to defend themselves. In this way, the Jewish people were saved from imminent destruction, and Purim has been celebrated as a reminder of God's provision and victory over Israel's enemies ever since. Hearing this story compels us to consider the most ancient hatred there is, anti-Semitism. As believers today, it is worth looking at the development of Haman's hatred for the Jewish people. How did personal disdain for one Jewish man, Mordecai, become a government-sanctioned attempted genocide? In Esther chapter 3, the evil Haman was filled with rage and sought to destroy all the Jewish people of the Persian Empire. Haman explained to the king that the Jewish people were different, that they did not follow the king's laws, but had their own laws, and therefore ought to be annihilated. Haman then asked the king to issue an official royal decree sanctioning the extermination of the Jewish people. Just like that, Haman's anti-Semitic rage had an outlet, and it meant death for the Jewish people. It's important for us to trace these roots, because this is a story that has tragically been repeated throughout history, most recently with the Holocaust and the ugly rise of anti-Semitism in the world today. Soon after coming to power, Hitler banned the celebration of Jewish festivals, including Purim. In a speech delivered the day after Kristallnacht in November 1938, it was declared that since the Jews killed 75,000 Persians in the days of Esther, the same fate could befall the German people. Therefore, the Jews had to be stopped. 8 years after uttering those words, the speaker, Julius Streicher, was executed on the gallows, like Haman, at the end of the Nuremberg trials. Streicher looked at the audience in the courtroom and yelled, "Purim Fest 1946, as his final claim that the Jews were out to get him. Today, Satan knows that he cannot destroy God's chosen people, but he tries throughout the centuries without ceasing. He has indoctrinated many in the world against the Jewish people, inciting anti-Semitism and perpetuating the oldest and most enduring form of hatred against the people group. However, in a very Purim-esque ending, Israel will prevail and the Jewish people will continue to flourish. How do we know? Because it's God's promise. Whether during biblical times, the 1930s and 1940s, or even today, through thick and thin, God has always held Israel in the palm of his hand. Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 35 to 37. Even though he was not mentioned by name in the book of Esther and the Holocaust felt more like the eclipse of God, he has never broken his covenant promises, and he never will. Today, we celebrate Purim with joy and confidence because the God who brought deliverance from the Jewish people in Persia is the same God who keeps his word and preserves his people today. Chag Purim Sameach, a happy and joyous Purim.
Hey friends and YouTube viewers, if you have any thoughts about what you just saw, share them with us. Please comment, like, and share our videos with others. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest updates on our ministry and insightful teaching. We would love for you to get connected. Until next time, Shalom.